in the heart of the sun-scorched African savanna, where acacia trees stretched like silent guardians against a bruised orange sky, lived Kofi, a proud and ambitious farmer whose ego rivaled the tallest baobab, and his wife, Ama, a woman of calm wisdom whose quiet voice often carried the foresight of generations, yet was frequently dismissed by her husband. One morning, as the first rays of the sun kissed the red earth, Ama warned Kofi of the coming famine, describing the ominous behavior of animals, the drying riverbed, and the whispering winds as signs that the land would soon betray those who ignored its rhythms, urging him to store grain and prepare his family. But Kofi, inflated by his pride, laughed, confident that his skill and strength could overcome nature itself, dismissing her words as unnecessary caution, and instead focused on expanding his fields, flaunting his growing wealth to neighbors and taking pride in his apparent mastery over the earth. Yet that night, beneath the silver gaze of a full moon, a mysterious jackal with eyes glinting like molten gold appeared near the granary, its gaze sharp, intelligent, and unyielding, as if delivering a silent prophecy, while Ama watched from the doorway, sensing the foreboding energy that Kofi could not perceive, knowing that arrogance, ignored wisdom, was a path toward devastation. The days that followed were marked by subtle warnings, the soil cracking stubbornly under Kofi's plow, crops withering despite careful tending, and animals acting erratically, avoiding the once familiar fields. But Kofi laughed off each sign, claiming Ama's fears were the imaginings of an overly cautious mind, confident that his labor and cunning would shield him from misfortune. Yet the deeper he sank into denial, the heavier the weight of impending disaster became. And one evening, as the sun set in a blaze of crimson across the horizon, he glanced at the dry, brittle earth and felt a strange unease, a prickling of conscience that warned him he might have been wrong, though he could not yet admit it. And Ama, standing resolute beside him, offered no words, only a calm presence, while the jackal's golden eyes gleamed from the shadows, reminding Kofi silently that pride, unchecked, often meets the harshest reckoning, and the first whispers of calamity were already stirring in the wind, ready to transform his laughter into regret. As the famine spread its merciless grip across the village, Kofi's once prosperous fields lay barren, dust rising in ghostly waves beneath a relentless sun. And though his wealth had once elevated him above neighbors, it now offered no protection against the insidious hunger that seeped into every home, every heart, and every cracked doorway. Whispers of warning traveled through the village like a slow, haunting wind, but Kofi, stubborn and blinded by pride, refused assistance from those who offered even the smallest help, insisting that suffering was for the weak and that he alone could endure, while Ama, silent yet determined, worked tirelessly to preserve what little remained of their grain, her hands rough and calloused from labor, yet her spirit unbroken, carrying the quiet burden of foresight and unheeded wisdom. Each night brought strange, unsettling dreams to Kofi, in which shadowy figures of ancestors, their faces hollow yet piercing, warned him of impending ruin. Visions of collapsing homes, starving children, and rivers reduced to cracked channels of despair. Yet each morning he rose with the stubborn arrogance of a man unwilling to accept truth, plowing empty fields, muttering curses at the sun and sky, refusing to acknowledge that the famine's cruel hand had chosen him for this lesson. Then, one evening, a sudden, violent wind tore across the savanna, uprooting young trees and scattering the last of his meager grain reserves, leaving Kofi and Ama trembling beneath a sky darkened with dust and foreboding, while Amma, her voice calm but urgent, pleaded once more, warning that nature's wrath was not to be ignored, that pride had blinded him to the fragile balance between man, earth, and the unseen forces watching silently. Even the animals, once vibrant and plentiful, now avoided their homestead, leaving an eerie silence that pressed upon Kofi's chest, a constant reminder of consequences he could no longer deny. And in the quiet of a windless afternoon, he finally glimpsed the devastation his arrogance had caused. Seeing Ama's sorrowful face mirrored in the dry soil, the empty granary, and the hollow eyes of the village children, realizing for the first time that wisdom ignored is often a harbinger of ruin. That night, as shadows lengthened and the distant cries of starving animals echoed through the barren land, Kofi felt an unfamiliar, gnawing terror seep into his bones, while the jackal reappeared from the darkness, its golden eyes fixed upon him like a mirror of conscience, silently confirming that the path of pride and denial had led him here, and that if he did not change, all that he loved and all that remained of his life could vanish entirely, leaving only dust, regret, and the echo of lessons long ignored. As the famine tightened its merciless grip, Kofi's body began to weaken, his strength dwindling under the weight of hunger and the relentless sun. Yet his mind clung stubbornly to denial, seeking to blame fate, neighbors, and even Amos' warnings for the suffering that now surrounded them, refusing to recognize that his own pride had brought disaster to their doorstep, while Amma continued to toil tirelessly, gathering wild roots, brewing herbal remedies, and preparing meager meals with unwavering patience, her face etched with sorrow and quiet determination, silently carrying the burden of foresight that had long been ignored. One dawn, driven by desperation, Kofi ventured alone to the parched riverbed, now a labyrinth of cracked mud and sun-scorched stone, encountering vultures circling high above, their shadows sharp and accusatory, and in the reflection of a shallow puddle, he saw himself gaunt, a stranger, cloaked. Fear gripped his heart as he realized the magnitude of the destruction his pride had caused, leaving him alone to confront the consequences he had long ignored. Returning home, he found Amma weeping silently beside the empty granary, her hands resting on the last few scattered grains, and the sight pierced Kofi's heart, forcing him to acknowledge the depth of his mistakes, while the jackal appeared again at the edge of the clearing, its glowing golden eyes unblinking, a living reminder that the warnings he had mocked were never illusions but signs of nature's unwavering justice. That night, as the wind whispered through the empty fields and the distant cries of starving animals echoed like mournful songs, Kofi lay beside Amma, hands trembling, heart pounding with remorse, realizing that life, once abundant, could vanish swiftly when arrogance eclipsed wisdom, and that even the wealth he had amassed, the pride he had cultivated, and the labor he had celebrated were worthless in the face of nature's quiet but relentless reckoning. In the darkness, he resolved to learn humility, to listen, and to heed the voices of those who truly saw the balance of the world, knowing that redemption, if possible, would require patience, perseverance, and complete surrender of the ego that had brought him to this edge. While the jackal's golden eyes glimmered one final time before fading into the shadows, as if acknowledging that Kofi's journey from denial toward understanding had begun. But the path ahead was steep, uncertain, and fraught with the silent lessons of a pride once untempered by wisdom. As the famine stretched into weeks, Kofi began to witness the full scope of suffering across the village, seeing children weakly playing among dust and empty bowls, elders staring blankly at barren fields, and neighbors retreating into hushed, fearful conversations about survival, while Amma continued her tireless work, offering what little comfort she could, her hands calloused, her back bent, yet her eyes reflecting both sorrow and quiet strength. One evening, as storm clouds gathered overhead like dark curtains drawn across the savannah, Kofi wandered aimlessly, confronting the ruins of his ambitions. Every fallen tree, every withered crop, and every cracked path, a stark testament to the consequences of ignoring wisdom. And in that moment of painful clarity, he realized that his pride had not only imperiled himself, but threatened the lives of all around him, leaving him bitter, hollow, and yearning for redemption that seemed just beyond reach. Amid the rumbling storm, the jackal appeared, moving deliberately through the village, guiding Kofi past faces etched with fear, despair, and hunger, showing him the depth of his forcing him to feel the weight of every choice he had made. And for the first time, Kofi fell to his knees before tears mingling with the first drops of rain, silently pleading for forgiveness, a second chance, and the wisdom to protect what remained of life and love. That night, as the storm poured down, washing parched earth with temporary relief, Kofi listened to Amma's quiet counsel, realizing that humility was not weakness, but the essential foundation upon which he could rebuild, and that his previous arrogance had been a barrier to understanding the delicate balance between humans, nature, and unseen forces that watched over the savannah. He understood that the famine, the ruined fields, and the suffering of the villagers were not punishment alone, but lessons stark and unforgettable, and that if he did not embrace humility fully, even this second chance could slip through his fingers, leaving nothing but regret, while the jackal, silent and watchful, remained at the edge of the village, golden eyes glimmering with the knowledge that vigilance, respect, and foresight must never again be neglected, and that the fragile harmony of life required more than toil, and pride demanded listening, patience, and the courage to heed warnings before calamity struck. A lesson Kofi vowed to honor as the storm subsided and the first stars appeared, glimmering faintly above the acacia trees like distant beacons of hope and vigilance. In the weeks that followed the storm, Kofi dedicated himself entirely to restoration, humbly working the land alongside Ama, learning the subtle rhythms of nature he had once scorned, listening to her guidance with patient attentiveness, and rebuilding their home, fences, and fields with careful, deliberate hands. While sharing the meager harvest he now tended with neighbors who had once offered assistance, slowly earning back their trust and respect, and demonstrating that lessons born of hardship could be transformed into acts of wisdom, empathy, and communal care. The jackal, once a silent harbinger of doom, now moved at a respectful distance, golden eyes glimmering with approval at Kofi's transformation, while the village itself, inspired by his humility, began to recover alongside him, small sprouts of life breaking through the cracked soil, children laughing cautiously as they played near the revitalized fields, and animals cautiously returning to the edges of the homestead, signaling the gradual restoration of balance. "Ama, ever patient," observed her husband with tempered joy, witnessing his evolution from blind pride to earnest repentance. And together they sowed seeds in fertile valleys previously ignored, spoke quietly of foresight, and cultivated not only crops but hope, nurturing both the land and the bonds of family and community. While Kofi, kneeling beside the riverbed that had once mirrored his ruin, scattered seeds into the replenished soil, whispering promises to honor wisdom, humility, and vigilance, and feeling the wind respond as if carrying the voice of ancestors in approval, rustling through acacia leaves and bending tall grasses. Each evening, as the sun sank behind the golden horizon, he reflected on the lessons that famine and arrogance had taught, recognizing that true strength lay not in defiance or domination, but in listening, learning, and embracing the counsel of those who saw what pride could blind him to, and the jackal, a constant witness to his transformation, lingered nearby, reminding him silently that vigilance and respect for life's delicate balance must never again be abandoned, and that even in the deepest shadow of past folly, the light of redemption could bloom when humility replaced arrogance, planting not only crops but seeds of wisdom, hope, and enduring harmony for generations to come. By the time the next dry season approached, Kofi had transformed not only his own life but the spirit of the entire village, earning the respect and affection of neighbors through acts of selflessness, wise stewardship, and unwavering humility. While Amma stood steadfast beside him, her quiet strength and patient counsel forming the foundation of his redemption, a living testament to the power of foresight, enduring love, and the wisdom of listening. The savannah, once cracked and lifeless under the harsh sun, now thrummed with renewed vitality as crops flourished. Water flowed again in modest streams, and animals returned cautiously, their presence a clear signal that balance had been restored, while the jackal, once a silent harbinger of doom, lingered at the outskirts, golden eyes glimmering with the knowledge of the trials endured, reminding all who watched that the lessons of nature must never again be ignored. Kofi, standing beneath the shade of a sprawling acacia tree at sunset, reflected upon the journey from arrogance to understanding, realizing that pride, unchecked, had brought him to the brink of ruin, yet wisdom, humility, and love had paved the way for renewal, and that life's delicate balance required vigilance, respect, and foresight at every moment. For even a single misstep could disrupt the harmony painstakingly restored, as the wind whispered through tall grasses and carried the distant laughter of children, the soft songs of elders, and the faint calls of returning wildlife. He vowed to honor the lessons he had learned, to guide his family and village with humility, to heed the silent warnings of nature, and to teach the next generation that true strength lies not in dominance or arrogance, but in the courage to listen, to act wisely, and to embrace guidance when it is offered, for life's abundance is fleeting and precious, and the consequences of neglect can be swift and merciless. In that moment, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and painted the sky in deep oranges and purples, Kofi and Ame stood together, hand in hand, witnessing the revival of the land and the village, a testament to resilience, redemption, and the enduring power of humility, while the jackal, a silent guardian of the lessons learned, watched from the shadows, golden eyes reflecting both the trials of the past and the promise of a future shaped by respect, foresight, and the hard-earned wisdom that only those who have faced the consequences of pride can truly understand, ensuring that their legacy would thrive in harmony for generations to come.